Hey everyone, my name is Jesse Reynard. Thanks again for checking out my channel. So today we're going to be talking about editing a portrait like a pro. So I've done a video like this before. You can view the link here. But there was no commentary or anything. It's just strictly an editing video. But today I want to show you how I actually do it again, but on a different portrait, and I'll walk you through the process. Let's get started. Okay. Alright. So I'm going to show you guys how I do my own editing style to a portrait. So the first thing we'll probably start to do is just start with the basics up at the top. So adjusting the exposure, do the camera calibration, and then distortion, and then we'll move into the different type of editing stuff that I do. So if you're looking at the image right now, the first thing you are going to want to do, is go down to calibration, and we're going to manually adjust the colors from here. So typically what I do is I will make the reds more orange, decrease the saturation in that, increase the greens, decrease the saturation in that, and I'm just going to reference my other picture here. Yeah, and then decrease the blues and decrease the saturation in that. So something along the lines of this. So as you can see already, the skin is more like muted. The next thing we'll do is go down to transform, just hit constrain crop. The reason for this, basically if you make any sort of adjustments to the distortion or rotation of the image, it's going to keep the image cropped to full. That way there's no weird white banding or anything like that. Then go to lens corrections, make sure you have all of this checked off, and then go to manual, and I'm going to add distortion. So the reason why I add distortion is to, it's not to like make a person look skinny or anything like that. It just adds a different effect to the picture, which I like. Next thing we'll do is we'll go down to effects, and we're actually going to manually add in some grain. I like to do this when it comes to portraits because of a few things. One, it just makes the picture look more unique. It looks more of like a vintage type look. But two, when it comes to portraits, and with our cameras nowadays, they're just so sharp where it shows every single pore in the skin. And I feel like adding grain to the image takes away the attention to the skin and, you know, brings your eye to what matters the most, and that's the image itself. So that's my opinion, but I think it helps. So when it comes to grain, I like to usually keep the amount around 20. I like to make the size very large, so around 60. And then I like to make the roughness large as well. So this reminds me of old printing paper that actually has like that grit to it, like you can feel it. Kind of like if you're sketching, whatever. So I kind of like that look. So basically that's without grain, and that's with grain. You can't really notice a huge difference, but to me it matters a lot. So the next step, we're going to work on skin and eyes, and just get that done and over with first. So basically to smoothen out the skin, you want to grab the brush and you want to just decrease your clarity. That's it. So normally when it comes to skin smoothening out, you want to apply it only to the dark areas. You don't want to normally apply the smoothing to the highlights because it just kind of blows them out and it looks like junk. But here the highlights aren't very bad. It's not like it was a super bright and sunny day and the highlights are really shining. So I'm going to apply the smoothing or the declarity to pretty much all the areas of the face, just so you can get an idea of what it looks like. And when you're doing this, you do want to avoid the eyelashes, of course. And you want to avoid the bridge of the nose. So as you can see, there's not a huge difference, but just adds that extra touch to the image, which I know I like. Alright, so now that we got the skin smooth, we're going to now bring some attention to her eyes. She's got big eyes, so we want to make those pop. First thing you want to do is grab your radial tool, and then we're going to increase clarity, increase the sharpness a bit. And that's basically it for that. So then you can just right click and copy it and bring it over to the other eye. So I want to make her eyes actually pop out more, so I'm going to grab my brush tool again. This time I'm going to increase clarity, but also really bump up the exposure. And we're just going to draw around her eye here. We're going to increase the saturation as well. So that's the one eye. I'm going to create a new brush for the other one because I don't really want to. It's a darker eye, so we don't want to really copy it entirely. Alright, so increase the saturation here. So that looks good. Say if you apply the edit to a part of the eye which you don't want done, you just hold down Alt, and then you can kind of remove that. Okay. So now we can see her eyes look way cooler here. This one might be a little bit too bright. That's right. I think we're okay with it. Okay. So the next part, we're just going to now we're going to play around with the I call it like the basics section, so exposure, tones, contrast, all that stuff. So we don't really want to bump up the exposure because it just ruins the skin tone. So we're going to keep the exposure where it is. I am going to decrease the contrast though, and I will show you why I'm decreasing contrast in just a moment. Keep the highlights where it is, keep the shadows where they are. We will increase the whites and then maybe decrease the blacks a bit because she does have, you know, black hair, eyebrows, shirt. And then we are going to decrease the clarity a bit. So when it comes to portraits, I like to actually decrease the clarity in the entire image. So now we're going to add a lot of dehaze to the picture. So when I mentioned how I was decreasing the clarity, when I mentioned how I was decreasing the contrast, I like to re-add contrast with the dehaze tool. So we're going to do that. I'm going to bump down the vibrance a bit, but I am going to increase the saturation a bit. So now we can see before and the after, before after, it's looking pretty good. Alright, so now here comes the fun part. We're going to do tone curves. So we're going to add some fade to it by increasing the blacks on the left hand side. Then you're going to grab your dial again, bring it down, and then add in or introduce your S-curve to the picture. And now you can see by doing that, so that's off and on, we're adding contrast to this picture again. And I like to play around between the middle and then the black. I like to add a dial here and really play around with it, because this is what's going to bring out the skin tones even more. And I want it to look more rich, so I think we're going to keep it just like that. And then if you click on channel and change it to red, green, and blue, we are going to add a S-curve to each one of these colors. Again, this is just the way I edit. You don't necessarily have to do it like this. But as you can see now, we're adding red to the highlights. We're going to introduce some green to the highlights. So to most people, they're probably going to think this looks terrible, but there is a point to all of it. So you can see right now it's looking like super contrasty. That's okay. There is a reason behind it. So I find by adding and manually adjusting these tone curves with the red, green, and blue, you can really add to the skin tone. And I mean, let's be honest, when it comes to portraits, and where you differentiate a very good photographer, especially on Instagram, with maybe an amateur photographer, it's all about skin tones and the way you do your color grading and split toning. And that's what really separates yourself from really another photographer out there. And we all edit differently. We all have our own styles behind it. You know, one person might do something way different than another person, and it's just the way we do it. So now we can see before and after. In my opinion, it's looking a million times better. So we're going to now play around with the HSL color area. And this is where we really want to play with the different colors and tones. So we're going to increase the orange. Probably keep orange where it is. We're going to crush the yellows, crush the greens. Going to maybe make her pants look more of like a teal. I think I'm happy with that. And now we're going to either increase or decrease the reds. When it comes to skin tones, if you increase a red, it's really going to bring out certain parts on their skin which you may not necessarily want. So for me, I'm just going to decrease it a bit. We want to keep the orange where it is because it's basically her skin color here. I'm going to decrease the greens like crazy. Maybe decrease the aquas a bit. Decrease the blue. Going to decrease the yellow. And then luminance is where you're going to add brightness or darkness to those specific colors. When you're editing a face, you don't want to darken the red because it may bring out different pores and different sections of the face that are not appealing. So we're going to increase the reds and the oranges and the yellow, decrease the green, keep the aqua where it is, maybe decrease. Actually, we're going to brighten up the blue. And I think I'm happy with where we're at right now. So as you can see, I'm bringing the attention to her and removing the attention in the background by really muting it. And now here's where we add split toning. So basically we're going to add color to the shadows and the highlights, and then we're going to balance it a specific way to how we like it or how I like it. So typically I like to add a blue to the highlight, or sometimes I like to add a red. It really just depends on the picture and if I want like a warm sunsetty feel, or if it's, I don't know, if I'm going more for like an editorial look, you always want to add like a blue or teal to the highlights or the shadows, however you want to do it. So I think I'm going to add the blue to the highlights and then maybe add some color to the shadows. And we're going to get a little crazy with it. I'm going to add kind of a wacky color here. So then for balance, you can really play around with it. So do you want more of the color affecting the highlights? Do you want it more in the shadows? Whatever works. If you can see, if I add the blue more to the highlights, it's kind of making her look more yellow, which I don't really want. So I think I'm going to bring it down into the shadows a bit more. Alright, and so that's basically it for the face editing, the eyes, all that stuff. I think I might visit the eyes again, and this time just to make my life a lot easier. I'm just going to add a gradual filter here, bump up the exposure and the clarity. Duplicate that, bring it over to this one. I think I'd be happy with this. Let's zoom out and see where we're at. Okay, that's like a little bit too much. So what we're gonna do is just grab that bit and decrease the exposure. Grab this one, decrease the exposure a bit. Okay. Alright, I like that a lot better. Kind of adds a cool effect to her eyes. Okay, so now very quickly we're just going to add some gradual filters, and then we're going to be all done. So basically you just grab your gradual filter, drag it over, and for me I like to brighten or maybe add some colors. So we're just going to bump up the exposure a bit, and then we're going to add some filters to that specific area. And for me, I like to add these weird kind of pink tones. You'll see it in a lot of my photos, but it's just the way I like to edit. So I'm going to add that to her side there, and then I'm going to add another one beaming down on her. Don't want to bump up the exposure too much. So I'm going to add a little reddish color and drag that over a little bit more. And that's it. So now you can see before, after, before, after. This is definitely more of like my type of look that I would go for. I think really quickly I'm just going to play with the warmth a little bit. Alright. Well, just for the sake of this video, I think I am going to call it quits on this one. Yeah, I think we're done. Alright, so that's basically the edit. It took roughly about 15 minutes, but I really want to show you guys that you don't necessarily have to edit in Photoshop when you want to do heavy edits to a portrait. A lot of people think, like, you know, depending on the before and after, all that had to be done in Photoshop. There's no way Lightroom's that powerful enough to make those type of edits, but it really is, and it's not very hard. You just have to know what tools to use and how to apply them. So I hope you all learned something from this video. If you did, make sure to share your edits with me by hashtagging Jesse Reynard on Instagram, and be sure to subscribe to my channel. It really means a lot. I'm trying to get myself up to 100 subscribers, so every subscription helps. The next video is going to be a giveaway again for another Lightroom preset. And just make sure you like this video, hit the bell to subscribe and get notifications for the next one. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of your weekend. Peace.